On today's Locked On Texans podcast, is it time? Tick tock, for a new backup quarterback. And with Stephon Diggs now in Houston, should the Texans still consider drafting a receiver?
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Turn up on this Tuesday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's draft week, ladies and gentlemen. No, Houston won't be drafting until Friday. We'll still
as of now,
right? With Nick Casario, you never know. But even if it's Thursday or Friday, Saturday, we'll come back on Sunday. We are your team every day. Thank you to all of our first-time guests. Come on in the house, sit down. Thank you for stopping by. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment while you're here to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. And to all of our returning listeners, 10th time, 20th time, 30th time, 40th time, doesn't matter. Thank you for coming back and listening to Cody and myself as we continue to talk Texans. I'm your football analyst, John, some sports guy. Hickman on the other side of the screen. I can't wait to tell y'all some of this good news, but Sports Illustrated's credential media member, Texans beat reporter, Cody Davis. What to anticipate for the draft this year? In a couple of days, of course. Should the Houston Texans still consider drafting a wide receiver? Is it time for a new backup quarterback? Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Cody, let's talk. I'm going to give it over to you right now. Currently, Houston has Case Keenum, Davis Mills, and Tim Boyle as backups. Can you trust any of those guys right now to be competent as backups? Let's talk backup quarterbacks. Is it time for Houston to move on?
It all depends on what's going to happen with Davis Mills. Now, before we start this conversation, it's important to know that there are about 7 teams right now who could be on the watch for a quarterback. And out of those 7 teams, like 4 of them is probably picking in the top 5. Once again, let's have a moment. We ain't got to worry about that no more. We got our quarterback number 7. But with that being said, there are some other teams that I'm looking at that could potentially explore the trade market for a quarterback. And of course, when you're looking at teams that explore the trade market for the quarterbacks, one, there's not too many teams that you can choose from. But 2, and most importantly, of course, out of everybody on this roster as of right now, the only other person that could be potentially traded is Davis Mills. And the only teams that I could come up with is 3. The New York Jets, given, that could be an insurance policy for Aaron Rodgers. The same thing for the New York Giants. When you take a look at Daniel Jones and his knee injury, which, by the way, they have Drew Lock. So I'm looking at it from a standpoint, maybe the Giants could explore the trade market if Daniel Jones isn't ready. And you can't really trust Drew Lock that much. We've seen him play football, and I would like to say that Davis Mills is better from what I remember. And then the only other team that I could consider are the Las Vegas Raiders, who, yes, they did sign Gardner Minshew, who is coming off a Pro Bowl caliber season, but Gardner Minshew, doesn't matter where he's gone, he was always in a competition for starting quarterback at training camp. So it all depends on.
I throw in the New England Patriots in that batch as well.
I'm not throwing. They're going to draft a quarterback, and I know you know more than me, and it better be Jay Daniels. But even if the Patriots do explore the trade market, I can still see them drafting a quarterback. But but to answer your question, John, who do I trust out of all of these quarterbacks? It's hard to say because, of course, right off the bat, you want to say Davis Mills if something happened to CJ. Man, I kind of feel like we need to bang on wood at this point. But if something happens to CJ, pause. But if something happens to CJ, I guess it all depends on the matchup, and we saw that during the 2 weeks that he was out due to that concussion mid-season last year. Like, of course, we was all expecting Davis Mills to take the helm as the starting quarterback. Coach D'Amico Ryans and offensive coordinator Bobby Sloyd thought it'd be best if they rolled with Case Keenum, and Case Keenum went 1-for-1. And who's to say if you went with Davis Mills if that did not reverse? So it's hard to say. If I had to choose who I trust more, is Davis Mills, but at the same time, Case Keenum, he has the experience, and that's the reason why they went with him as the starting quarterback during those 2 games that CJ Stroud missed.
And I think a lot of people, when they hear this conversation and this topic, they may think to themselves, why are we talking about this? There are so many other needs this team has aside from backup quarterback. And I would say to that, having a backup quarterback you can trust, I think, is an underrated luxury for teams. And when I look at Davis Mills in his role, I question if Mills has that trust of the coaches and front office, at least enough trust to where Houston can afford to ignore the backup QB position. And again, Keenum, Mills, Tim Boyle are the backups right now for Houston. The level of trust between these three, how much is there on a scale of 1 to 10? I don't think it's necessarily high. Houston, their relationship with Case Keenum, do they keep him around, especially now with Stephon Diggs coming over? Could that be a part of the, helping him get acclimated to the city of Houston and this franchise?
I think so.
So I look at him as having some value. Tim Boyle has proven that he is a journeyman in this league. That leaves us with Davis Mills. He did take snaps in 6 regular season games for Houston, through 2 TDs in that Browns game. But can he be trusted when it really matters? You trust Davis Mills if something happens to be able to run an offense with confidence? Let's be real. I don't think so. I don't. And I think that when you look for a backup quarterback, you need a couple of things. Number one, you need trust from those guys that you're commanding a huddle with, right? With the other guys. You need trust from the sidelines, from your coaching staff. You need trust from the front office. And I also think when you look at some of the better backup quarterbacks in the NFL, a lot of those guys are kind of fan favorites in a way.
Mm-hmm.
The personality. The fans like them. They believe if something happens, this guy can at least compete to keep you in the game, right? Or down the stretch of an NFL season, this quarterback can at least compete to keep you in a race if you're in a race to maybe make the playoffs or not. And I don't know if the trust is there with the fans. So I look at Davis Mills in Houston. I think to myself, this may be the end of the road. And for Houston, I don't know if that backup option comes from the NFL draft or not, but maybe there could be an option for them post-cut day. Number one, we're going to see a lot of guys get cut.
Mm-hmm.
With how it works now, right? The last preseason game, a couple of days later, guys got to shrink their rosters. Teams got to shrink their rosters from 90 to 53, and that's a lot of players that will be without a job. So if I look around the NFL right now, I could see maybe a CJ Berthard, maybe an option for Houston. He spent time with both Bobby Slowick and D'Amico Ryans in San Francisco. He's a very experienced backup in the league. He's been successful as a backup in the NFL. He knows pretty much the ins and outs of this of this offense, at least at its core, without getting too creative with it. He knows what Bobby wants to get done. Again, spent time with both of those guys in San Francisco. And I think that would probably be an upgrade over, at the very least, Tim Boyle. I will say this. It's very important. We talk about Dameon Pierce getting an opportunity to compete in training camp. It's very important for not only Dameon Pierce, not only for KG, Kenyon Green, but for Davis Mills to go out there and prove his worth. Because I will say this about Davis Mills. Unless he's traded, which will probably be the best for Houston to maybe get some compensation in return, has he done enough to, compete to be on the NFL roster?
Of course.
He has, but at what
so.
level? And if I'm Davis Mills, if I'm not going to be in Houston, obviously CJ has surpassed me in my chances to be a starter in the NFL for this franchise. I would like to go somewhere where I can at least compete to have an opportunity. And I think training camp and preseason will be very important for him to do that. And that also could be important for Houston because if he goes out there and proves that he can still play at a high level in the NFL, that may bump their draft compensation in return for him if they look to trade him. But overall, I don't know if Davis Mills is the backup quarterback for Houston anymore. And I like the value that Case Keenum brings to this franchise. But listeners and viewers and Cody, I'm going to ask you this before we move on. What value does Davis Mills has right now for Houston?
I want to say that he is the best backup quarterback, but again, I just keep going back to last season. That's what I'm saying.
With CJ for those 2 games out,
and even when I go back and I look at what Coach DeMeco Ryans said, the main reason why they went with Case Keenum was due to his experience, and we know that was during the time where it's like, okay, the Texans could have a possibility to make the playoffs. The stakes was risen. Now, would that still would have been the case if it was early on in the season? Would that have still been the case if the Texans, let's say, wasn't about to embark on a playoff race? Who knows? Maybe then they probably would have went with Davis Mills. But honestly, John, I cannot answer what's the value of Davis Mills in Houston as of right now.
I think Houston was in the playoff race at the time. They was in the playoff race.
Yeah, that's why I say the stakes was higher. And to DeMeco Ryans, Nick Caserio, Bobby Sloyd, and them point, regardless of what you think about Case Keenum, he has experience of playing in pressure moments.
Yeah. And another thing, man, with Mills, sometimes, the relationship could be over. Mills has done some good things for himself since he's entered the league, right? And this is a young man who, my goodness, I mean, he's going to always be remembered for connecting on 4th and 20 and then converting a 2-point conversion for Houston. He's going to always be remembered for that. He's going to always be remembered for looking resilient in a time where he was not prepared and ready to play football in the NFL during his rookie year. He's going to be remembered for some good things, but in my old relationships, there are some things I can remember that were great. But overall, when it's time to move on, it's time to move on. And I think for both parties, it may be time to move on. I think any player that comes into the league, he still wants to compete and have an opportunity to play ball games. For Davis Mills last year, in those 6 games that he was featured, a lot of those were relief moments for Houston. When you look at the Browns game, was able to kind of do some things late, but overall, that was not a good performance for Mills. I just think it's time. And that's okay. Unless he proves to be able to beat out Case Keenum. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of the MLB, which makes getting tickets for the Astros even easier and faster. Prices on Game Time actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time does a lot. But most importantly, it takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. You can save up to 60% off whenever you buy last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater events near you with their last-minute deals, including flash deals and zone deals. Also, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry with their insurance coverage. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That is LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And this next segment is brought to us by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you, And it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking it as well. Here it is. You know what? Houston, I'm tired of having to pay for parking. I'm tired of having to pay for the vibes, the aesthetics, the DJ fees for mid-food. I'm tired of it. The food ain't that good. I got to pay $50 before I even get in the door. The service is bad. And on top of that, I got to pay additional. Y'all ain't even doing the 20% no more. It's 22, 24% on gratuity for the grass walls. I'm tired of it. Okay. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports teams, and it's important to get things off of our chest every once in a while. It's important. You can't allow a lot of things to stew up in you. Get it off your chest, and there's a great way you can do that with therapy. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible, suitable to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of Locked On Texans. Before we move on to our next topic, John, I want to boast a little bit about myself because about 3 years ago, so 2021 NFL draft, and I want to say Davis Mills might have been the 6th or the 7th quarterback taken in that draft, and I remember when the season got started, Davis Mills went through his struggles, came back, and had a phenomenal end to his rookie season. I remember a lot of people made fun of me when I said that Davis Mills was the second best rookie quarterback or the second best quarterback of that draft class, or third, depending on how you felt about Trevor Lawrence at the time. Well, 3 years later, there's only 2 quarterbacks that's still with their original team that drafted them in 2021. That is only Trevor Lawrence, who 9 times out of 10 is going to sign the max extension, and Davis Mills at the time of this recording, because on yesterday, Zach Wilson was traded from the New York Jets to the Denver Broncos, and I would never in my life understand why the Jets drafted him with the number 2 overall pick. But John, I just wanted to throw that out there because regardless of what you think about Davis Mills, he was one of the best quarterbacks to come out in that very disappointing draft class in 2021. Shout out, Mills Mafia. That's what we used to call ourselves, huh?
Y'all self.
The Mills Mafia, the Mills Truth. Hey, this one for us, baby. But maybe if the Houston Texans would have built a better roster around Mills, maybe his career in Houston would have ended up a little bit better. And I know one thing that a lot of people used to always talk about in terms of Davis Mills was the fact that whether or not he did not have enough playmakers, enough weapons. However, the new quarterback that was number 7 that's starting under center, who we all love, by the way, he definitely do not have that issue. But John, this was a topic that people are still debating on social media, some of our colleagues and stuff, and it brings an interesting point. Should the Houston Texans still consider drafting a wide receiver at some point during the draft? Now, before moving on, just take a listen to what Coach DeMeco Ryans had to say about adding playmakers to this team.
I don't think it hurts to add a lot of playmakers to your team. So as many guys as you can add, we're trying to add as many playmakers as we can, offensively, defensively, right? We're trying to build the best team for 2024, and that's what myself and Nick, that's what our job is, to add the right pieces, acquire the right players to have us go out and be our best in 2024.
The Houston Texans are entering the 2024 NFL Draft with 9 picks, starting with pick number 42 at the time of this recording. John, should the Houston Texans go out and use one of their 9 picks on a wide receiver?
Great question. First and foremost, to Davis Mills' point, yes, there was an issue with weapons. As a matter of fact, I got a video of Davis Mills walking around the locker room in tears singing "No Weapons." No weapons. But talk about the receivers. and should Houston draft one, I want to shout out Coach Barnes. At the time of this recording, I had just talked to him about an hour ago. Y'all know him on Twitter as Coach Barnes, as one of my good friends that I met through this Texans life. He believes that the Houston Texans should still invest into a wide receiver. I believe that as well, but I'm not placing. In the past, I thought it probably should have been 42 or 59. They draft a receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you bring over Stephon Diggs, now you look at your wide receiver group being Diggs, Collins, Tank, Mechie, Xavier, Robert Woods, Noah Brown, in no real specific order, but we know who the top three is. Steven Sims is also on this roster. You got guys that's on your practice squad. Right now, I think Houston is probably in the best they've ever been historically in terms of talent in their wide receiver room. With that being said, I think Houston should still draft the wide receiver. Maybe between rounds 5 and 6, possibly. There's a guy that they really do like that may be slipping, or maybe somebody that isn't on a lot of people's radars. I wonder, shout out to Cole Thompson, who mentioned this about Anaya Smith out of A&M. I wonder where they view him now, because one point that Cole made that stood out a lot, you go get Anais if you have a more full wide receiver room. And I think he mentioned that Houston trading for a receiver.
Yeah.
And then boom, a few days later, Houston traded for Stephon Diggs. And so that's been on my mind for a while now. Where does Anaya Smith rank on the wide receiver big board, draft board? And where does he rank for Houston? And where does he rank amongst the rest of the wide receivers? Will he be available in round 4 or 5? Who knows? And you also look at what he can do for a team in terms of being a special teamer. But I still believe Houston should address the wide receiver's position. They've talked about how their offseason additions won't impact their draft board. 70% of that, I believe. 70% of myself believes that. Curveball here. What if that's pertaining to the running back position? Right? What if their offseason moves to bring in a Joe Mixon, not only trading for him, but also giving him the extension? What if running back was like high on the Houston Texans draft board, or higher than what we may be anticipating it to be, and they look to draft a running back within those first 4 picks that they have? Would that be a shock?
Yes, it would. Because when I asked Coach D'Amico about whether or not these offseason acquisitions, how much that's going to play into how they're going to attack the draft, and he said, no, it didn't. I had that in my mind, the running back position and the wide receiving core. Because, John, I was basically banging on the table, or about to start banging on the table for the Houston Texans to, draft a running back as high as the second round, because I'm looking at it from a standpoint, you cannot go into 2024 with that same running back group that you had for this year. But they got Joe Mixon, and now that's dead. When I look at the wide receiving core, John, I'm going to say no. I do not want to see the Houston Texans use one of their 9 picks on the wide receiver, because if you break it down as of right now, they have about 7 to 8 wide receivers that they can use in the passing game. You already know the big 3, Tank, Nico, Diggs. Then you got the other 2 that it's questionable, but they have some potential. John Mechie, Xavier Hutchinson, we already know about them. Then you have guys that you can utilize for depth purposes, situational purposes, and Robert Woods and Noah Brown. I understand there's a lot of people who are not confident in Robert Woods. I'm not either. John, I know you are hell-bent on the Houston Texans getting rid of him, saving that $5 million. However, if they do open up a potential spot for the Houston Texans, there's a guy by the name of Jared Wayne that they signed as an undrafted free agent last year.
Yeah.
And this guy,
they got guys on a practice squad. Shout out to Jared Wayne.
Exactly. And for those of you guys who are not familiar with Wayne, last year he spent majority of the year on the practice squad. When he was on the 53-man roster, he spent majority of that time as part of the special team unit. But Jared Wayne is an interesting case because he can actually give this wide receiving core an additional lift. During his final season at Pitts, this young man recorded a career high 1,063 yards on 60 catches with 5 touchdowns. Plus, the best part, the best thing I love about Jared Wayne is the fact that he's 6'3", 6'4". So that's going to give you another big body receiver that CJ Stroud could utilize in the passing game to make sure that he come away with those 50-50 balls. I like what I saw out of Jared Wayne in training camp last year. I believe he ran more so with the threes, with the third team unit, with the third string. However, John, I think he is the guy that can give this wide receiving core an additional boost to help them get over the hump in 2024.
Hey guys, it's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is also in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose, in your pockets. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? You're sitting on the couch right now. You're thinking to yourself, maybe I'll bet today, maybe I'll bet tomorrow. No, bet right now with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make your first bet an automatic win, baby. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Welcome back, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Before we close out today's podcast, the anticipation. I don't think the anticipation for the NFL draft is what I mentioned. I don't think it's been as high as the last 2 years, mainly because you got your quarterback, you got Stingley, you got Will, right?
You got Tank,
you
got Chris.
A lot of teams are really anticipating the draft when you know that your team is picking on Thursday. Houston have known for a while now that they're not picking on Thursday. They're picking on day 2, unless Houston decides to trade up and maybe go get the 29th, 30th, 31st, 32nd overall pick. That's a possibility depending on who is available and what Houston can give up. But I think overall, the level of excitement is different this year compared to last year. Last year, the level of excitement was we can finally get a quarterback. This year, the anticipation and level of excitement, I think, is centered around we can have a full team. We don't have to have a team that's top heavy. We can have a very well-rounded team. Houston did a very good job in free agency. We already know about the young building blocks that they have, led by CJ, Will, Tank, Petrie, Stingley, right? Is Harris. I can't forget about Christian Harris. Nico. They got some good young pieces. Did a very good job of bringing in the veterans during the free agency period. Now you're looking at this team being able to go out there and say, oh, we've got the best player available at this position. We got a player right here that can impact this position that may not have to be a starter day one. But, boy, when he gets the ball in his hands, he could do some things. We got a D tackle that we believe could come in and may not be a starter day one, could be a starter day one, but he can impact the run and passing game. Now you're looking at Houston to fill those voids that's not as big as they were, a few years ago. And I think for me, covering this team, that's what I'm anticipating the most. How can Houston have a team where it's not 15 of 53? It's not 25 of 53. It's 53 of 53 where every man that can make this roster is an impactful player in some form or fashion.
Don't look at me crazy when I say this. I'm anticipating Nick Caserio and Coach D'Amico Ryans orchestrating a deal to trade up and getting one of the top cornerbacks or one of the top defensive tackles. Because every time I think about this draft, man, I, of course, go back to what both of them said in Indianapolis, talking about the importance of the defensive line. Of course, that's Coach D'Amico Ryans, Nick Caserio, showcasing his willingness to pair Darius Stingley Jr. with another top-tier corner. I go back to Byron Murphy, and I know that's a stretch, but I go back to Byron Murphy, talking about the lengthy meeting he had with the Houston Texans, the same thing with Kool-Aid McKinstry, which I would love that, by the way. Both of those guys had, long, lengthy conversations, and I know a lot of things have changed since then because at the NFL Combine, they still had their first round pick. Of course, as we know, they don't have it as of now. But that's what I'm anticipating, man. For the Texans to go up and still come away with one of those top tier targets that they had on their draft board before things got crazy this offseason. I know it's a stretch, especially with the two guys that they named, but you're looking at a situation in Coach D'Amico Ryans and Nick Caserio, man. Their draft board is broad, and they have several guys that I'm pretty sure they would like to target. And that's what I'm anticipating. I think for the third consecutive year, we're going to walk away thinking to ourselves, wow, the Houston Texans really did X, Y, and Z in the draft. They really got this guy.
Yeah. And I also think we're going to be shocked.
Gotta be.
Something's going to happen where Houston shocks us for the good.
Yeah.
They've been on a streak right now. I don't see Nick Caserio not coming away with Executive of the Year this upcoming season.
Should have got it last year.
They got it last year. I know I'm thinking very far ahead in advance. Shout out to my best friend, Corey White. He believes that Nick Caserio is the best GM in the league. But I think that we're going to come away from this draft, as I'm anticipating today, we're going to come away from this draft shocked that, wow, they did this for a good reason. So
it ain't going to be a shocker like last year. For sure.
Nothing's going to shock last year.
Everybody's sitting there, we got
Houston Texans have traded up with it.
But we sitting in the NRG Stadium, we type in me and John Texan. All right, this is how we going to attack it. Within 5 minutes later, the Houston Texans are back on the draft board. And with the number 3 pick, Will Anderson Jr., that shocked everybody. Yeah. Like, John, you've been in the press box. Press box is fairly quiet. People in their zone and working.
It's a certain decorum there.
But when that happened, everybody was like, okay, what in the world? I ain't gonna lie, that's one of my top 5 favorite moments covering not just this team, but just being in Houston sports media in general. Because when I tell you everybody was stunned, that was a phenomenal moment.
Yeah. And that moment is gonna feed families. Thank y'all for listening to this Tuesday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Hey, listen, do us a favor. Comment, subscribe, and like the page on YouTube, of course, wherever you listen to the Locked On Texans podcast. Give me a follow on Twitter at John_Hickman12. It's an exciting week to be a Texans fan, to cover this team, because I genuinely believe Houston is going to come out of this draft with a well-rounded draft, which will add to the roster being much more well-rounded, and we will see this team looking like, on paper, a top 5 team in the NFL.
They already do, if you ask me. If not top 5, especially top 10. But as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, it's Cody, COTY DAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace. Oh, snap. My glasses.
That's what happens. That's what. And keep it on here, too.